Modern citizens demand modern rights, not simple democracy or literal constitution interpretation and application. Authentic judicial review contradicts certain modern preferences that have resulted from multifaceted moral and ethical altercations. However, according to the Federalist Paper No. 78, a constitution is and must be regarded by the judges as a fundamental law. In other words, judges attempt to look at the plain meaning of a law. They believe in a clearly delineated separation of powers and should not attempt to interfere for a desired outcome of the process. Law is to be interpreted, not created, by the judiciary. In small town Gilbert, Arizona, a little church, Good News Community Church, was restricted by law on when and how they could display signs inviting the community to church. The signs could only be 6 square feet and not visible in daylight hours other than Sunday. Violations of this ordinance would lead to heavy fines and imprisonment of the pastor and the members. The sign restrictions varied between situations, and other instances allowed political and ideological signs to remain largely unrestricted in signs and duration of display. The Reed v. Town of Gilbert case was argued January 12, 2015. All of the justices agreed that the distinctions drawn by the ordinance were impermissible, but they were divided 6-3 on the rationale, and the majority saying all content-based laws required the most exacting form of judicial review, which is strict scrutiny, and which is exceptionally hard to satisfy. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote for the majority, "Content-based laws, those that target speech passed on its communicative content, are presumptively unconstitutional, and may be justified only if the government proves that they are narrowly tailored to serve compelling state interests." The ordinance set limits on the dimensions of various kinds of temporary signs based on the messages they conveyed in Gilbert. The text of the town's code regulated signs based on what they say, and the town is applying the code in a manner that overtly singles out the church's religious speech for discriminatory treatment. Under the First Amendment, both actions are impermissible, and the code is unconstitutional restriction on the right to free speech. Cases involving religious freedom and freedom of speech and expression remain hard to tackle when society labels Christianity and Christian principles and values as violations of other religious expressions and associate discrimination with Christian practice. People are intimidated by Christianity because they expect judgment and fear discrimination for other forms of expression, yet they fail to understand the purpose of religious freedom rights. Religious freedom has an interpretation as diverse as the citizenry of the United States. Freedom of religion is endowed to every single person, and the interpretation of religious freedom should remain consistent. The founders did not intend to establish a federally recognized religion, but rather offer the same freedom of expression under ultimate truth and divine law established in the Constitution. Religious freedom is made possible by divine law and the observance of Christian principles, and does not discriminate Christian values from providing unbiased legislature. The government cannot target one form of speech with severe restrictions while allowing more speech for others in similar circumstances. And the courts cannot use a test that allows that discrimination to happen, as was the case in Gilbert. In its decision, the High Court threw out a free speech test used by some courts that allowed the government to decide what speech is more valuable and thus entitled to greater protection under the First Amendment. The test improperly excused unlawful discrimination so long as the government said its motive was good. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit used the test to determine the Good News Community Church's religious signs expressed far less valuable speech than what the town called political and ideological signs, thereby justifying the town's stricter limits on the church's signs. the Supreme Court found that Gilbert's temporary sign rules unconstitutionally discriminate against a particular kind of content, and that the city did not have any legitimate government interest that required such discrimination. The code abridged the petitioner's freedom of speech because the government proved the sign code was narrowly tailored to serve compelling state interests. Beyond lifting an abusive law, challenging and removing this ordinance is an important step in recognizing religious freedom that represents equal opportunity to all people. The court's real claim to power rests on substantial review of laws, which is based on the claim that the Fifth Amendment, guaranteeing liberty, and the 14th Amendment, guaranteeing the equal protection of the laws, mandate not only the equal application of law to all citizens, but also fair law. Christians believe in universal moral truth and divine law declared by God, and that He has spoken in the Bible. There was a time hundreds of years ago when the nation sufficiently agreed on this view, but today, people question why certain biblical precepts make good laws for the state. Without biblical principles establishing freedom, the rights enjoyed today would not exist. Religious freedom does not exempt Christianity, nor deny particular beliefs, but rather upholds a lasting principle from divine law that declares all people have a right to believe and express belief differently. Attempting to suppress Christian voices in a community violates the First Amendment and subjects other forms of expression to hypocrisy. All citizens, even modern citizens, should exercise freedom acceptance over fear and suppression, as in the case with the sign ordinance of Gilbert, Arizona.